Welcome, everybody, to the Institute of Classical Studies Byzantine Colloquium for 2025. For those of you who haven't met me, my name is Catherine Harlow. I'm a professor of classics in the University of London and also director of the Institute of Classical Studies, which historically has hosted the colloquium and still does today in its new and very effective virtual form. The colloquium itself has been a fixture in the ICS calendar long before we all learnt to use Zoom for 3 decades now. It was first established in the 1990s, initially as a summer term seminar series, and has grown into an annual multi-day conference. And along with the London MA in Late Antique and Byzantine Studies, the colloquium has been one of the ways in which researchers in this important area across the University of London's collegiate institutions have collaborated together, as well as established and kept London on the map as a centre for Byzantine research. Now, as many of you will know, much has changed since the 1990s in terms of both the University of London's institutional structures and indeed departmental configurations in ways that have not always been to the benefit of classics and Byzantine studies. But the colloquium has continued to flourish, and I'm particularly grateful to Dr. Haralambos Dendrinos of the Royal Holloway Hellenic Institute, who's led in the organisation of both the colloquium and the master's degree in recent years, often working with the collaboration of further partners, just as this year the Hellenic Institute has collaborated with Royal Holloway's Centre for Greek Diaspora Studies. I'm absolutely delighted that the colloquium continues as a highlight of the ICS's academic programme, and I'm absolutely committed to the Institute continuing to support this very dynamic area of pre-modern research, both in London and nationally and internationally. Now, I'm not a Byzantinist, I'm a classicist, but the topic of this year's colloquium, I think, can't fail to resonate, living as we are in times that are riven with conflict, instability, fragmentation of political power, both within and between nations, arguments often carried out for pretexts to do with faith, and sometimes for very real reasons to do with faith, as well as the pressures of both natural and human-made disasters, generating population movements and socioeconomic, cultural, and political pressures. I don't think it's the role of history or of historians to offer crass parallels with the present, but it is a sad fact that history, including pre-modern histories, have been brought into the present-day culture wars and are appealed to in simplistic ways, often by bad actors, to shore up or provide a pretext for various forms of political intolerance. And I think this makes it all the more incumbent on us, as scholars of pre-modern times, to collaborate in researching and returning a more complex and a more faithful image of the past, as well as upholding standards of free and rigorous inquiry, even when we disagree. I particularly welcome the focus in this year's programme on dialogue as well as conflict in interfaith encounters in the Eastern Mediterranean, and on seeking out case studies of unity in diversity, as well as unity versus diversity, in a different but very dramatic period of historical and political change. I'd like to welcome all of our eminent speakers from the UK, Austria, Cyprus, Serbia, and the United States. And I hope that those of you who haven't visited the Institute of Classical Studies will at some point come and spend some time with us, and we'll be able to welcome you to Senate House. Already the conversation that we had as we were waiting for the colloquium to start formally has made me realise how wonderful it would be to have some of you coming regularly to the Institute, working in our library, taking advantage of what we can offer as visiting fellows. I'm particularly pleased to welcome to this year's colloquium Dr. Ioanna Kriembadi, the Deputy Head of Mission at the Greek Embassy in London. And we're sorry that Dr. Marios Theocharous, Cultural Counsellor of the Cyprus High Commission, can't join us for the event, but we were very pleased and grateful to receive his good wishes. I shall now hand over to Haralambos, who I know wants to say some words about practical arrangements for the colloquium, but also, first and foremost, wants to say some words about Archbishop Anastasios of Albania, to whose memory this year's colloquium is dedicated. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Catherine. Fellow students, colleagues, friends, on behalf of the Hellenic Institute at Royal Holloway, I would also like to welcome you to our scholarly gathering. We offer our deep thanks to Professor Catherine Harlow for placing our colloquium under the auspices of the Institute of Classical Studies of the School of Advanced Study at the University of London as part of its annual Byzantine series, and for embracing our idea to explore interfaith encounters in late Byzantine Mediterranean. We would like to extend our warm thanks to Katie Bolton, manager of the ICS, and her predecessors, Valerie James and Ildiko Ola, and also to Gemma Dormer, academic engagement team leader of the School of Advanced Study, for their generous time, their expert advice, and their invaluable help. Our gathering is the fruit of collaboration between the ICS, the Hellenic Institute, and the Center for Greek Diaspora Studies, as Catherine mentioned, at Royal Holloway. 2 years ago, Dr. Chrysovalandis Kyriakou, Dr. Evangelos Kataphilis, Jack Jolie, Dr. Achilles Hadjikyriakou, and Dr. Paris Chronakis, who succeeded Achilles as director of the Center for Greek Diaspora Studies in May 2024, discussed the prospects of organizing jointly an interdisciplinary conference to examine new findings and approaches in research concerning interfaith encounters in the Eastern Mediterranean during the late Byzantine and the early Ottoman periods between the 13th and 15th centuries. Fueled with excitement, in the subsequent months, we approach colleagues and fellow scholars representing different disciplines and specialities at the University of London and other universities and research institutes around the world who share our interest in the subject. We realized that an in-person or hybrid gathering would create logistical and other difficulties, and therefore we decided to hold it solely online. On behalf of my fellow organizers, may I express our profound thanks to those who were able to accept our invitation and for their readiness to join us virtually. We hope that in the future we shall be able to hold our gathering in person. Today and tomorrow, we shall be sharing findings, thoughts, and views on various topics of their expertise in order to assess and reassess aspects of interfaith tension, conflict, tolerance, and coexistence, readdressing earlier debates on the mechanics of identity formation, boundary building, interreligious and intercultural exchange, and community inclusion and exclusion, in the hope that we shall provide fresh and stimulating perspectives on the complexities of a colorful yet harsh and violent world inhabited by different denominations of Christians, Jews, and Muslims. The program booklet, which is accessible at the ICS website and can be emailed to you at your request, gives information on the themes of our sessions, the moderators and speakers, with abstracts of their 30-minute papers and short notes on their affiliations and specialities. We have also left some blank spaces for notes in case some of us would prefer to have a printed version at hand. Let us try to keep time according to schedule so that we have some fruitful discussion at the end of each session. Meanwhile, you are invited to type comments and questions you may have in the chat space in Zoom. Chrysovalandis will raise them on your behalf, combining similar ones for economy of time. If you wish to make comments or questions directly during the discussion after the session, please use the yellow hands in Zoom, activating your video and microphone when you are invited by the moderator. Now, those who are unable to join us wholly or partly, please be advised that our full two-day event, as Catherine mentioned before, will be recorded. with the exception of the paper by Professor Teresa Shockers tomorrow, which will not be recorded for contractual reasons with Princeton University. There has been also a last-minute change. Our speaker, Dr. Nur Sobers Khan, sends her apologies as she will be unable to join us for reasons beyond her control. So tomorrow we shall prolong our break by 30 minutes and resume for the third and last session at 2:30 London time instead of 2 o'clock. Please be advised that the recording of the event will be posted and be accessible on the ICS webpage as kindly mentioned also by Catherine. Finally, our colloquium is dedicated to the loving memory of Anastasios Yannulatos, Archbishop of Tirana, Durrës, and all Albania, who passed away at the age of 95 last January, having devoted his long life and ministry to actively promote interfaith dialogue in the world. I quote from the obituary written by Protopresbyter Father Emmanuel Klapsis, published in the World Council of Churches website. Archbishop Anastasios, as a scholar and professor of the history of religions at the University of Athens, conducted extensive studies on various religious communities across Africa and Asia through on-site research in Uganda, Nigeria, Cameroon, Ghana, Kenya, Tanzania, India, Thailand, Sri Lanka, Myanmar, Korea, Japan, and China. He became acquainted with Taoism and Confucianism in Singapore, Taipei, Hong Kong, and China. Additionally, he studied Islam through his travels to Lebanon, Syria, Jordan, Egypt, Turkey, Pakistan, West Africa, and Iran, as well as through his 33-year residence in Albania. His perspectives and accounts of his experiences and knowledge gained from his many years of rigorous engagement with world religions are documented in his book, Traces of the Search for the Transcendent, a collection of religious studies. The experiences and knowledge he acquired through direct contact and on-site study of different religions, along with his deep conviction in God's unconditional love for humanity, shaped his commitment to contributing to interfaith dialogue and collaborating with members of other religious communities to foster peaceful coexistence and cooperation based on justice among various religions and cultures. To achieve this goal, Archbishop Anastasios actively participated as a member of the Theological Committee, Dialogue with People of Other Faiths and Ideologies, and the European Council of Religious Leaders. Within the scope of his ecumenical activities, he served as president of the World Council of Churches between 2006 and 2013, vice president of the Conference of European Churches from 2003 to 2009, and moderator of the World Council of Churches Commission on World Mission and Evangelism from 1984 to 1991. In 2007, he co-founded the Interfaith Council of Albania, alongside other religious leaders in Albania, reflecting the conscious decision of religious leaders to work together for peaceful and just coexistence and the well-being of all people. His contributions to interfaith, peaceful coexistence and cooperation in Albania have been highly appreciated by Albanian religious leaders, as the Church of Albania embraces and cares for all individuals in need, regardless of their religious affiliations, whether they are Orthodox Christians, members of other religious communities, religiously indifferent, or even atheists. Archbishop Anastasios' concern for all people, regardless of religious beliefs, has led some to refer to him as the Archbishop of Tirana and the atheists. He accepts this title, the obituary continues, as he considers all human beings as brothers and sisters, regardless of their faith or choices. He particularly emphasizes The Church does not exist solely for herself. She exists for all people. He firmly believes that human salvation depends on respecting others and their differences. Unquote. May his example inspire and guide us. We pray that his blessed soul rests in eternal peace, surrounded by the divine uncreated light. Let us keep a moment of silence in his memory. Αιωνία του μνήμη. On this note, it gives me great pleasure to invite my co-organizer, Dr. Chrysovallantys Kyriakou, Research Associate of the Hellenic Institute and lecturer in Ecclesiastical History at the Theological School of the Church of Cyprus, to chair the first session of our colloquium examining society and politics. Chrysovallantys.
Thank you. I welcome everyone to the first session of our colloquium, and it's a pleasure to introduce our very first speaker, Rustam Shukurov, professor in Byzantine history at the Institute for Medieval Research of the Austrian Academy of Sciences. Professor Shukurov's paper is entitled Muslim Christian Conversions and Crypto-Muslims in Byzantium. Professor Shukurov, you can if you have a PowerPoint, you can share your screen.
I have. Just a moment. Share. No,
Yes.
just its screen. No, I need to share.
You can minimize. You can minimize.
Oh, yes. How is it? Acrobat share. And so, can you see?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So, okay. Okay. Thank you so much indeed for your kind invitation to participate in this important colloquium. It's an honor and pleasure for me to be part of this remarkable event. When addressing the topic of Muslim-Christian encounters in late Byzantium, scholars typically focus on dramatic narratives of the large-scale Islamization of Christian population in former Byzantine territories. This approach was established at the very earliest stages in the development of Byzantine studies as an academic discipline, and culminated in the classic monograph by Spiros Vrionis, The Decline of sorry, just a moment. It's incoming. Okay, sorry. The decline of medieval Hellenism in Asia Minor and the process of Islamization. At the same time, this now well-studied phenomenon of Islamization tends to obscure an equally striking and important reverse process, the Christianization of Muslims by the Byzantines. The significance of this conversion practices lies in the fact that they provide a clear window into the functioning of what might be called the immune mechanisms of Byzantine society. They also offer valuable insight into many other domains: law, ideology, sociology, anthropology, demography, and more. Oh. Just a moment. I'll try to master it. Okay. Today, I would like to focus in greater detail on the baptism of Muslims by the Byzantines. To begin, I will briefly outline the main topics of my presentation you see on the screen. First, we will talk about the dogmatic status of Islam in Byzantine civil and church law, a typology of baptized Muslims, then coerced conversions. We will discuss coerced conversions. After that, we'll talk about dual identity and apostasy. And finally, we'll discuss crypto-Muslims, just crypto-Muslim communities in the Byzantine world. First, I would like to begin with the dogmatic status of Islam in the Byzantine theological and juridical context. A clear typological distinction was drawn between Judaism, Christian heresies, and paganism. Jews and Christian heretics, such as Latins and Armenians, were regarded as knowing the one true God, that is, in our terms, monotheists. Although the abjuration rite for Jews involved baptism, a converted Jew was not required to anathematize his God, but to accept the Christian doctrine of the Trinity. Most Christian heretics during abjuration required no rebaptism, but only a renunciation of their doctrinal errors. In contrast, pagans who wished to embrace Christianity had to undergo baptism and explicitly anathematize their gods. Within this framework, Muslims were classified as apistoi, unbelievers or pagans, akin to ancient Hellenes or various barbarian pagans from the north. The rite of abjuration for Muslims required an anathematize their God and Prophet Muhammad and involved finally baptism. Although the Byzantine legal system recognized Orthodox as the only legitimate religious affiliation in the empire, traditionally exceptions were made for the first two groups, Jews and Christian heretics. Within the juridical domain of the empire, Jews maintained synagogues and systems of religious education. Similarly, for instance, Armenians and later Latins were permitted their own churches and clergy. In practice, Jews and heretics could be considered subjects of the empire with corresponding obligations and rights. This wasn't the case for pagans, including Muslims. They were not permitted to perform pagan rites within the empire. The sole exception concerned foreign diplomats, merchants, captive soldiers, and military mercenaries. As early as in the 8th century, under external pressure from the Islamic Caliphate, Byzantine authorities sanctioned the construction of mosques for Muslim captives who formerly retained the status of foreign nationals. Eventually, mosques were also permitted outside prisons for long-term Muslim visitors, again under the pressure, under the external pressure of the Muslim potentates. The Byzantine dogmatic and legal categorization of Islam as a form of paganism thus predetermined the imperial stance towards Muslims who, for whatever reason, found themselves within the Byzantine legal framework. Since the emergence of Islam in the 7th century and throughout its entire history, Byzantium was in a state of permanent struggle with its Muslim neighbors for political and cultural supremacy, for the control of the flow of money and goods in the Eastern Mediterranean. Byzantine contacts with the Muslim world, especially in border zones and areas of direct military conflict, were exceptionally intense. The baptism of Muslims occurred primarily as a result of these contacts in the frontier zones. Oh, okay. Over the course of their long interaction with the Muslim world, several consistent types of Christianization can be identified. I suggest 4 types which you see on the slide. These are the baptism of defectors, second, the baptism of enslaved combatants, third, the baptism of the civilians captured during military raids, and the fourth, the baptism of local populations in newly conquered areas. Let me give some more examples for these 4 types of Christianization. Late Byzantine history offers numerous examples of defectors, both individuals and groups, from Muslim Asia Minor who converted to Christianity after crossing over to the Byzantine side. Among the individuals who defected to Laskarit and Paleologan Byzantium, we may probably include the founders of certain Byzantine aristocratic families who bore Muslim-derived family names such as Apelmene, the oldest family of Sultanos I, another family of Sultanos, Anataulas, and the like. It is not unlikely that some of these individuals also brought with them sizable groups of their fellow followers. The largest mass defection to late Byzantium was connected with the flight of the Seljuk Sultan Izzeddin Kaikavus in 1262, who was accompanied by thousands of both sedentary and nomadic Muslims. Most of Kaikavus' followers were baptized and resettled in the region of Dobruch. Second, enslaved combatants. The enslaved combatants who were baptized and freed by their masters can possibly be exemplified by Georgios Pachatur, who was referred to by Manuel Philis. From Philis' epitaph, we know that Pachatur was taken captive by the Byzantines and adopted by the aristocratic family of the prominent Protobestiarios, Protosebastos, Andronikos, Angelos, Komnenos, Dukas, Paleologos, just a high-level official of the empire. The third type, a deliberate policy pursued by the Byzantine authorities, which was aimed at capturing non-combatant population, especially women and children, goes back to antiquity. In the Hellenic period and under the Roman Empire, military victories were typically accompanied by the mass enslavement of civilian population. While adult male captives could face execution, women and children were usually spared in order to be enslaved, kept, or sold on the slave markets. References to taking captive children and women are relatively seldom in Byzantine textual and visual sources. Unlike Byzantines, the Romans quite naturalistically depicted the capture of women and children in their visual arts. The representation of a barbarian woman dragged by the hair by a Roman soldier was a commonly understandable symbol of victorious splendor. The only Byzantine parallel, to my knowledge, is found in the 10th century Joshua roll. The imagery of which probably this imagery probably imitated late Roman examples. You see on the slide 5 captive kings of Joshua who are dragged by the hair in distinctive Roman manner. It is quite possible that the Joshua rolls miniatures glorified in a symbolic way 10th century Byzantine victories over the Arab Muslims. Although Byzantium's military capacity declined after 1204, the practice of seizing civilians continued in the following decades. The civilians taken in such campaigns were often turned into domestic slaves, but there was another possible route for captured children. They could be sent to charitable institutions, especially orphanages, which might be imperial, ecclesiastical, or private. There, the children were baptized and taught the Greek language and literacy, effectively being transformed into true Romans. The most detailed information on this practice comes from the Comnenian period, for instance, Saints Peter and Paul's Orphanotropeion in Constantinople, which was enlarged and reorganized by Alexius I Comnenus, housed captive barbarian orphans in the 12th century. In the second half of the 13th century, the same Orphanotropeion in Constantinople is said to have cared primarily for captured barbarian children. The fourth type of Christianization concerns the incorporation of large Muslim populations into the empire, a phenomenon which was widespread in the 9th to 11th centuries and had largely ceased to be relevant in the Laskarid and Paleologan periods. It can be illustrated by quite a colorful picture provided by the capitulation of Muslim Malatya. After the capitulation of the city, the domestic Kurkuas had 2 tents erected, one of them with a cross. The population was told that all Muslims who agreed to embrace Christianity could go to the tent with the cross, and in that case would recover their families and property. Those who wished to remain Muslims should go to the other tent and would be taken by the Greeks to a place where they would be freed. Quite predictably, a large number of Muslims went to the tent with the cross and adopted Christianity. A few decades later, this practice was modified in the direction of an even more tolerant attitude towards local Muslims. When Nikephoros Phocas conquered Tarsus, the terms of peace offered to its population included 3 options: to remain Muslims and leave the city, to remain Muslims and reside there upon payment of a special tax levied on Muslims, and the third option, to convert to Christianity and pay the regular taxes. The retention of the local Muslim population in newly conquered territories became a predominant policy until the first half of the 11th century. Moreover, the Byzantine administration could even entrust these newly acquired Muslim regions to officials who retained their Muslim faith. Of course, this was a forced and temporary measure on the part of the Byzantine authorities, but nonetheless quite remarkable. Here on the slide, you see an example of such a Muslim official, the bilingual Greek and Arabic seal of the Vestarches Muhammad al-Salihi. This is another example of the same notion. The patricios Nasr bin Musharraf, who in all probability kept his Muslim faith as well. Obviously, defected Muslim individuals and groups embraced Christianity voluntarily. In case of conquered Muslim population, enslaved captives and relocated children, Christianization can only conditionally be described as voluntary, even if it may have appeared so in formal terms. In addition, we do have an account of an openly coerced conversion remarkable for its vividness and emotional intensity. In 1264 or 1265, the Seljuk Sultan Kaikavus plotted against Michael Palaiologos, and when the plot failed, he fled to the Golden Horde. The emperor's rage descended on the Sultan's emirs and troops who had remained in Byzantium. Muslim emirs and soldiers with their families, slaves, and servants were brought together in St. Sophia, in Hagia Sophia, where Byzantine clergy and officials demanded that they adopt the Christian faith. Those who accepted baptism remained unscathed, but those who wanted to remain Muslims at all cost were blinded. The fundamental inflexibility of both Byzantine civil and church legal systems with respect to Islam led either to the immediate Christianization of Muslim migrants or to the formation of Christian and Islamic dual identity. The problem is that some Anatolian Muslims, if we talk about the events from the 12th century to in the 12th century and 13th century, the problem is that some Anatolian Muslims who settled later in Byzantium had been baptized in their infancy by their Christian mothers. However, according to a synodal decree issued during the Patriarchate of Chrysoberges, that is in the mid-12th century, those taken captive by the Byzantines in the lands of infidels were to be rebaptized unless witnesses certify that they had been baptized after their capture by the Byzantines. The history of the Anatolian Seljuks provides us with the possible consequences of such Christian-Muslim syncretism in Muslim Asia Minor. Those grown up in such a mixed Christian-Muslim environment could have become persons of dual identity. That is, when in a Christian environment, such persons would identify themselves as Christian, deferring their Muslim identity. They would, however, embrace their Muslim identity when in a Muslim space, in turn deferring their Christian self for the time being. Dual identity can be exemplified by the religious habits of two refugee Seljuk sultans in Constantinople, Kai Khusrav I in the turn of the 13th century and Kai Khusrav II in the mid-13th century. Their stories are well known, actually. However, there are also instances of apostasy unrelated to the religious duality outlined above. Dimitrios Homatenos, Archbishop of Ohrid, relates about a person who, being within the Byzantine canonical jurisdiction, abjured from Christianity to Islam. This former Muslim, Alisher, Aliserios by name, was baptized in his youth and for many years was a good Christian. However, his faith was shaken and he trampled the cross. In the end, Alisher repented and appeared before the ecclesiastical authorities and was given a penance. Evidently, Alisher went through a spiritual crisis, returned to Islam, and then went back to Christianity. The depth of Christianization of Muslim neophytes settled in Byzantium quite naturally could have been questionable. The Pontic region provides a unique evidence of crypto-Islam in the Byzantine lands, precisely under the rule of the Grand Community. According to the Persian historian and geographer Hafiz Abru, during one of the campaigns of Samarkandan Tamerlane in Asia Minor, so it's just the turn of the 15th century, his army passed near the border of the Empire of Trebizond. Some of the subjects of the Trebizondine ruler were outwardly Christian, but secretly professed Islam. Members of this community approached Tamerlane and pleaded with him to come and liberate them from the Christian yoke. The inflexibility of Byzantine civil and canon law, I noted earlier, led to the inevitable emergence of newly baptized Christians who continued secretly to profess Islam. It's absolutely natural. Christianized Muslims were a byproduct of Byzantine military activity. Normally, Christianization, whether voluntary or coerced, was the only way for a Muslim immigrant to enter Byzantine society and to attain social success or wealth. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Shukurov. Very interesting presentation. I have some questions, but we will discuss them later on.
Okay.
We now turn to our second speaker, Jack Dooley. Jack is a doctoral student at the Hellenic Institute of Royal Holloway. He's working on the Gazmuli. And Jack's paper is entitled Wielding Greek and Latin Faith Identities in Late Byzantium, the Case of the Orsini Family in the Morea and Epirus. Jack, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Sorry, not that one. Yeah. Can you see the screen?
Yes, everything.
Thank you.
Is fine.
Borderlands are pivotal in the development and evolution of pre-existing identities and the formation of new ones. As Homi K. Baba explains in his study The Location of Culture, in-between spaces provide the terrain for elaborating strategies of selfhood, singular or communal, that initiate new signs of identity and innovative sites of collaboration and contestation in the act of defining the idea of society itself. A good example of the notion of a borderland, both temporally and territorially, is Epirus in northwestern Greece in the period between the two conquests of Byzantium, or Romania as it appears in the sources, in 1204 and 1453. During this period, Epirus found herself on a number of borders. Politically, to the west and south, the Latin states of Italy and the Morea, respectively, to the north, the Albanians and Serbians, and to the east, Romania, reclaimed from the Latins after the Roman return to Constantinople in 1261. Religiously, Epirus stood on the border between the Roman Catholic world and the so-called Byzantine Commonwealth of the Balkans, a region united by religious, cultural, and ideological similarities. It is no surprise, then, that Epirus witnessed a succession of rulers from a multitude of political, cultural, and religious backgrounds. Amongst these dynasties were the so-called Orsini family, who ruled Epirus for some 17 years between 1318 and 1335. We shall focus on aspects of identity represented by the members of this important family. The Orsini arrived in the Greek world in 1207, 3 years after the fall of Constantinople to the armies of the Fourth Crusade. Although the details are shrouded in mystery, we do have a narrative account of the Orsini's arrival given to us by the late 14th century Aragonese version of the Chronicle of Morea, according to which, at that time, there was in Cephalonia a man named Maio of Naples, who in his youth had come from Monopoly as a fugitive with some of his companions for the following reason. For he was a swineherd with these companions, and because his companions saw that he was bold and wise, they made him the captain of the swineherds, and he showed them reason and justice as if he was their lord, and at one time made gallows, and had one of the swineherd boys hanged on it, and the boy's father, learning that his son was dead, made a clamour to the lord of Monopoly and demanded justice. The said Maio, having learned that the court wanted to take him, fled one night by boat with his companions and arrived in Cephalonia. The chronicler continues, and being in Cephalonia, he found there a Greek who was like the governor of the island, and had a daughter, whom he gave as wife to this Maio of Monopoly. And then, through his courage and skill, he became lord of Cephalonia, Jacinto Zakynthos, and Théatri, which is now called Valle de Campare, Ifaki. And while he, Maio, was lord, having learned of the great fame of Prince William II Villardouin, he wanted to do homage to him and have him as lord. He did this for fear of the Greeks of the island, so that they would not kill him. He went to Clarenza, and the prince received him and did him great honour and made him knight and count. And from then on he named himself Count of Cephalonia. And then the prince married his daughter Margaret to the son of Count Maio, who was named Count Richard. Although the chronicle's portrayal is dramatic, and we may doubt that Maio was lord amongst pig farmers, his seemingly wanton murder of his companions, and his subsequent flight, to which we shall later return, it does highlight valid concerns, the likely difficulties that a foreign noble would face upon entering into this foreign land, namely the rejection, resistance, and threats of the people they had so recently conquered. We should now focus on the faith identity of the Orsini family to examine how each member of the dynasty wielded their religious identity to overcome the particular difficulties and opportunities that they faced during their reigns. We shall trace through the story of the Orsini how their multiple identities evolved, and how their faith is presented in the extant source material. We shall assess the extent to which their success was driven by their ability to adapt their identities to their ever-changing social and political environment. As we've seen, 1207 was to prove to be a momentous year for Maio, and happily for us, a rather well-documented year. The conquest of the islands must have occurred prior to the 23rd of April, the date in which Pope Innocent III sent a letter to the bishops of Monopoli, Pogliano, and Coversano, 3 towns in close proximity to each other in southern Italy. This letter, which confirms the claim of the Aragonese chronicler that Maio was originally from Monopoli, is a response to a request from, I quote, the nobleman Count Maio, the clergy and people of the island of Cephalonia, unquote, who were looking for a new bishop, as the seat lay empty.
We need to do a little quick pro quo first.
As the seat lay empty. Whether this group included both the Latin newcomers and the local Greek population is unclear, although the fact that the desire was for a Latin priest may suggest that this was a request from the Latin population. In fact, there already was a man in mind for this position, a certain Benedict, who was seemingly held in high regard by all. We may reveal the true reason for his elevation to the episcopal see later. The Capilonians asked for the Pope to accept their request that, since the Metropolitan See is deprived of a pastor, and to which, even if it was not vacant, they could not have recourse, as it still remains disobedient and rebellious towards the Apostolic See, we might deign to confirm the election itself by apostolic authority. Through this letter, Pope Innocent III left the decision of the fate of the bishopric of Cephalonia to the 3 bishops. They were to judge, as it states, his learning, life, lineage, and other matters in order to establish his suitability for the office. The aside in the Cephalonian request is a curious one, namely that they would not have accepted the presiding bishop of Cephalonia, who undoubtedly would have been of the Orthodox creed, if there had been one when they arrived. While this conviction may have only been hypothetical in the first letter, given that the seat was empty, a second letter from later in 1207 reveals the sincerity of Maio and the rest of the islanders. This letter, written by Pope Innocent III to the Archbishop of Patras, concerns specifically a troublesome Greek bishop. I quote, "It comes to our attention that on the island of Zakynthos, which falls under the jurisdiction of our beloved son, the nobleman Count Mayo of Kefalonia, a certain Greek bishop not only remains disobedient and rebellious towards the Apostolic See, utterly disregarding its directives, but also leads a dissolute life, causing scandal among many. Thus, the Bishop of Zakynthos fell into the same category that the islanders refused to accept only a few months earlier. It is interesting that the phraseology of both letters are virtually identical, both disobedient and rebellious. Once again, this was understood to mean that this bishop was Greek Orthodox. The additions of accusations of misbehavior was likely to strengthen and make more immediate the necessity to remove this priest. For Mayo, removing this bishop could serve two purposes. The first was to rid himself of a potentially influential Greek figure who may serve as a centre of resistance against his rule. The second was a display of the strength of his Roman Catholic faith, his unwillingness to accept one who disobeyed the Apostolic See within his own domain. It was not only through these outward expressions of faith and loyalty to the Pope that Mayo could display his support for Pope Innocent III. He too must have realized the importance of a personal relationship with the Church. This he saw and acted upon alongside his political maneuvering, for only a few days after the last letter, on the 15th of September 1207, Innocent III wrote his personal letter to Mayo in which he expresses his joy at Mayo's newfound faith. I quote, "For as long as you have humbly made known to our apostolic office through your letters, although you have hitherto led a life akin to piracy, committing many acts detrimental to your own salvation and injurious to the Creator, you now, recognizing the frailty of your condition, seek pardon for your transgressions." Mayo not only repented his past sins, but also promised to support the Church in the future. "You are eager," the papal letter continues, "to make amends for past offences through the pursuit of a new life, labouring with all your strength with all your strength in obedience to Jesus Christ and in support of the Holy Land." The Count of Kefalonia thus offered both spiritual and temporal support to the Apostolic See. What then was to be his reward? Innocent makes this abundantly clear. "For our part, assuring you of our grace, we shield you with the protection of our blessing, hoping that if you persevere in your chosen resolve for devotion, you will not only gain the reward of heavenly recompense, but will also receive no small increase in temporal blessings." Mayo's intentions thus become clear. Exercising the principle of reciprocity, he was offering his support to the papacy in order to receive the support of the Pope in his new venture. This is not to doubt the true feelings that may lay behind Mayo's repentance, but political motives are too strong to deny. In his precarious political position, the support of the papacy was vital to survive threats from the West. Unfortunately, few records survive for the years following after 1207. An argument ex silentio could be made that this is a sign of the stability of Mayo's control over Kefalonia, Iphaki, and Zakynthos. What little does survive concerns church politics, as the Bishop of Kefalonia attempted to secure their position within the ecclesiastical hierarchy. The next source of particular interest was a letter written in Greek some 20 years after Mayo's arrival in Kefalonia in 1228. This letter, which is now preserved at the Russian National Library in St. Petersburg, was authored by the Bishop of Kefalonia, who identifies himself as none other than Benedict. Whether this is the same Benedict suggested for elevation to the episcopal see in the letter of 1207 that we saw earlier is difficult to tell, but it would make sense that Mayo would want Benedict to become bishop, given a detail that Benedict reveals in this letter, namely that he is actually Mayo's relative. In any case, the letter was sent either to the Bishop of Nafpaktos, John Apokavkos, or to one of his representatives, and serves as a pledge of allegiance to Mayo and his wife, the most noble Komneni, and their children. This letter marks a shift in Mayo's politics, away from the papacy and towards the Epirates. This is made clear from the beginning of the letter, in which, following the protocol, Benedict addresses the ruler of Epirus, Theodore Komnenos Doukas, as the most devout and Christ-loving ruler. This shift in Mao's politics also had an effect on the ecclesiastical situation in Catalonia, as Benedict's Catalonian church became intertwined with that of Epirus. Interestingly, this does not mean that the Latin Church disappeared, for it evidently did not. Benedict remained a bishop of the Catholic Church, but seems to have also reported to the Orthodox Metropolitan of Nafpaktos, who is referred at the end of this letter as Benedict's most holy master. This must clearly have created issues for Benedict, for, as he states in this letter, while he was capable of drawing up a pledge of allegiance in Latin, in the Roman language, to do the same in the Greek language would prove more challenging. It is for this reason that Benedict wrote to the Metropolitan in order that such a document would be written by a Greek legal expert. This new state of affairs would not last long. Upon the defeat of the Epirot army at the hands of the Bulgarians at Klokonica in 1230, and the subsequent blinding of Theodore Komnenos Doukas, Maio swiftly abandoned Theodore, reverting back to the support of the Latins and the Prince of Achaia, Geoffrey II Villardouin. This episode illustrates the fluidity of religious identity in Catalonia. Maio appears to align his faith affiliation with prevailing political powers. When courting the papacy of Innocent III, a hard line was taken against disobedient and rebellious Orthodox priests. Later, during a period in which Epirot power under the Komneno-Duki reached its zenith, as their holdings extended from Arta to Adrianople and Theodore Komnenos Doukas was proclaimed emperor, the Orsini quickly turned their attention to this direction, and back again when the winds once more shifted. We currently have little knowledge of the last years of Maio's reign. It would appear that he died sometime between 1238 and 1260. The death of Maio saw little change in the political stance of the County of Catalonia or to the Latin identity of its new ruler, Count Richard, although he was half Roman through his mother, the Ducaina. The first contemporary mention of Richard's reign was in a practicon for the Diocese of Catalonia, listing the various properties that the Bishopric of Catalonia held on the island. The fact that this document was written in Greek is not surprising, as similar documents from Latin and Venetian-ruled Romania too were written in the local language. Nevertheless, it does mark the continued use of Greek, as we saw with the Bishop Benedict's letter, within the Catalonian court. Furthermore, it is a sign that Richard may have desired to strengthen the organization of the Latin Church within his territories, to secure its position over the Greek Church, a process begun by his predecessor Maio. This would certainly seem to be the case if this practicon was based on a pre-Orsini document in favour of the Greek Church, as David Jacobi has suggested. It is clear that Richard maintained his father's faith, remaining loyal to the Latin Church, which would serve him well. After the death of his first wife, a sister of Thomas II, d'Autrancourt, Richard would remarry. His second wife was the Princess Margaret, daughter of Richard's old lord, William of Villardouin. This seems to have been a coup for Richard. This marriage was not free, however, as Richard promised Margaret a generous inheritance after his death. Moreover, it appears that this marriage was not legal in canonical terms, for it turns out that Margaret was related to Richard's previous wife. This, however, was overcome by papal dispensation, as we learn in a letter from Pope Boniface VIII in 1299. Dispensation is granted to them so that they may remain in the marriage which they have contracted, being ignorant that the sister of the nobleman Thomas of Salona, who was once the wife of Richard, was united to Margaret in the third or fourth degree of consanguinity. Richard's faith, therefore, allowed him to overcome a potential hurdle in his political path, and he and Margaret could maintain their marriage. No doubt Richard's marriage to Margaret moved him up the political standings, for soon after the death of Florent of Hainaut, the previous bailiff, Richard was made regent of the principality on behalf of Richard's sister-in-law Isabel. Richard died soon after the events of 1299, after a dispute with a member of his retinue. Confessionally, Richard was clearly Latin and Roman Catholic, firmly establishing the territories of the Archbishop of Catalonia soon after his ascension, as well as requesting papal dispensation for his marriage with Margaret. The reason for maintaining his Western identity is clear. It was easier for Richard to achieve his political goals if he maintained a Latin and Catholic prosopon. Upon Richard's death, his son John inherited the county. Unfortunately, little is known about John's reign, but what we do know shows that it was largely a continuation of his father's, and, as such, the identity that he betrays remains basically unchanged from that of his forebears. Much like his grandfather Maio, John had a Roman wife, Maria, a daughter of Nicephorus I. There were signs of the beginning of a shift towards Epirate affairs. Having spent time in the despotate during the early years of his marriage, he must have seen the opportunities available in Epirus. Perhaps this experience convinced John of the ease at which a Latin force could conquer the despotate when he advocated for an expedition which he thought could conquer the territory from the Morea all the way to Thessaloniki. John was believed, and a resultant campaign began in 1304 under John's joint command alongside Lord Raimondas, a Provençal knight. The campaign was ultimately a failure, with the Morean army defeated by John's mother-in-law, a woman that the French Chronicle of Morea describes as the wisest in all of Romania. The blame was laid squarely at John's feet, having underestimated the power of the Epirates. There are few indications on the nature of John's political and faith identities. We do have his seal, which presents him as a Latin figure, and there's no signs of a change of faith. This is expected given his maintenance of interest in Latin politics, which culminated in his involvement in the war between the Mallorcans and Burgundians in 1315. During which John would be accused of poisoning Prince Louis of Burgundy in 1316. John had 4 children by his wife Maria, and it would be his eldest son, Nicholas, who would inherit the county after his father's death. Nicholas's reign marks the greatest revolution in the identity of the Orsini. During his youth, like his father, he spent time in Arta with his uncle, the despot Thomas of Epirus. But unlike his father, Nicholas saw his opportunity to claim the despotate not in the Latin Morea, so weakened by the recent conflict, but through claiming the throne for himself. This he did when he murdered his uncle in 1318, supported by his aunt, Anna Paleologina, the daughter of Michael IX Paleologos. In order to accomplish this, Nicholas must have realized that he had to deploy a Roman identity. This process must have begun from an early age, when his mother instilled in him a sense of Romanness. One way in which Nicholas used his noble descent from his mother was by adopting her surname, Nicholas Ducas Angelos Komnenos. This name is extant in a single case, a Venetian letter from 1322, in which he is recorded as Duca Angelo Komneno. It must have been useful for Nicholas to be able to wield this name, for it not only gave him a Roman identity, but connected him to the ruling dynasty of Epirus. Nicholas's political identity would be supported too by his elevation to the position of despot by the emperors Andronicus II and Michael IX. This must have occurred soon after his coup in 1318. The reasons for granting the title are clear. Alongside his position as the most powerful individual in southern Epirus, Nicholas was now the son-in-law of Michael IX, through his marriage to his aunt Anna Paleologina. This adoption of identity was not limited to the political sphere, for around the same time, a second change also occurred when he abandoned the Latin creed for the Orthodox faith. The reaction to Nicholas's conversion came in 1320, when Pope John the 22nd aimed to return Nicholas to the Catholic Church, as is explained in Baronius's Annales Ecclesiastici, continued by Odorico Rinaldi. I quote, "But he gave a province to the Archbishop of Neopatras, so to endeavour to recall the Count of Catalonia to the Latin rite, who had defected to the Greek schism." Unquote. We are not told whether Nicholas converted to the bishopric of Kefalonia to the Orthodox Church as well. However, this seems likely, as the Pope gave the Archbishop of Neopetrasa province to replace the income lost in Kefalonia. It is also uncertain whether he himself maintained an Orthodox faith prior to his reign and prior to his arrival in Epirus. Maintaining the Orthodox faith would have been of great aid to Nicholas, as he was attempting to establish himself within the Epirate court and to secure support for his coup. Nicholas's mother, Maria, may well have influenced him on this matter. Nevertheless, Nicholas's conversion to the Orthodox rite was an important shift in the identity of the Orsini. They no longer looked to the Pope, who had been one of the major supporters of the Counts of Kefalonia, especially in its inception. Now they looked to the east, to the Emperor of Romania, and to the Patriarch of Constantinople for guidance. While politically they may still have had connections with the West, spiritually they looked east. An extant seal of Nicholas is another sign of this spiritual evolution. While the reverse offers Nicholas's political legitimacy as despot of the Roman court, the obverse, with a bust of a saint with the inscription Saint Nicholas, is a marker of his faith. What the seal confirms is Nicholas's membership of the Orthodox Church, in this case by using a Greek inscription and Orthodox iconography. While the Romanness of Nicholas's identity made him acceptable to the citizens of the Arta, those of Ioannina would be more difficult to persuade. Nicholas's new regime was rejected by the Ioanninites. Instead, the citizens of the city offered to open their gates to the Roman garrison at Berat, north of Ioannina. The military official at Berat, Sir Yannis Palaiologos, jumped at the chance to take control of the city so easily. A crucible was issued by Andronicus II in 1319, which granted the citizens a great number of concessions. One of the most interesting of these was a promise to, I quote, never ever hand over the city of Ioannina itself from my empire to the Franks or to any others. It seems plausible that this clause was aimed at Nicholas in particular. Possibly the citizens of Ioannina rejected Nicholas's attempts to appear to be Roman. Rather, to them he was a foreigner of Frankish origin. Nicholas could not accept this slight to what he considered to be his rightful claim over the city of Ioannina. The result was a war, which broke out in 1320, as the Roman state was distracted by the civil war being waged between Andronicus II and Andronicus III. Nicholas laid siege to Ioannina, but proved unable to break the resolve of the defending forces. The Epirate leadership clearly lost hope in the situation, and Nicholas's brother John, who had joined the court in Arta after a period as governor of Kefalonia, saw his opportunity. John killed Nicholas and claimed the county. John had thus murdered his way to becoming Lord of Arta, much like his brother had previously done. His first task was to resolve the war, which he did by accepting to rule the city not by his own authority, but as governor on behalf of the Roman state. This is in line with the previous agreement we mentioned between the emperor and the citizens of Ioannina, that the city would not be handed over to foreigners. In any case, John set to task, completing what his brother had started, to fully revolutionize his identity to that of a Roman despot. This was, to an extent, forced upon John, as his insular county, which had been conquered by his great-grandfather Maio over a century ago, was seized by John of Gravina in 1325. At first, John followed similar steps to his brother, Nicholas, using their maternal family name of Ducas Angelos Komnenos. He, too, found himself a suitable Roman wife, Anna Palaiologina, the daughter of the protovestiarios Andronicus Palaiologos. As well as investing in his political identity, John also seems to have placed significant importance on his cultural identity. The most evident source for this process for John's reign was the metaphrasis of Homer's Iliad, compiled by his protege, the poet Konstantinos Harmoniokos. It was not only in cultural matters that John and Anna took a great deal of interest, but they took Also, they also took a great care in spiritual matters as well. One way in which this took form was through the creation of ties with the monastic foundations of their territory. The most important is the relationship they built with the Euromeri monastery and its founder, St. Nilos Erechiotes. The monastery near the town of Philiatis was probably founded around 1330. John was one of the patrons of the monastery, which is confirmed by St. Nilos's testament written at the end of the saint's life in 1337. St. Nilos also makes an effort to stress the pair's noble and pious image. Having now disposed of these matters in this way, I assure my lords in the spirit and my sons, the pious and most noble Lord John Angelos Ducas, and the most Christian Vasilisa, Lady Anna Paleologina, of my heartfelt prayer, I beg God always to bestow his gifts on them, to grant peace to the empire and victories over its enemies, visible and invisible, and an abundance of all sorts of good things. There is no doubt that John and his wife were spiritual people, and this must have formed an important part of their identities. Documents such as Nilos's testament only strengthen the image that John maintained as a Roman despot, supporting Roman culture and Roman religious institutions. Furthermore, upon his short-lived conquest of Thessaly in 1332, John was quick to establish himself in the region, focusing his efforts on the supporting monastic foundations. We can find one such case in the convent of the Theotokos Eleusia at Lycosada, near the town of Phanarion, for which we have a crucible issued by John granting exemptions from certain taxes. John, much like his forebears, would soon face a violent death at the hands of his wife, Anna Paleologina, who feared that her husband was trying to murder her. As Grigoras narrates, as no few illnesses had begun to afflict the household, the woman, fearing her husband's schemes, killed him before he could kill her. John's reign marked the high watermark of the Orsini rule since their first entry into Roman politics in 1207. They had gone from pirates to counts and finally to despots. Through this whole process, the Orsini needed to adapt their multiple identities to fit their changing contexts. This was first symbolized by Myros acquiring the identity traits of a Latin count, especially through papal support. This identity seems to suffice until the reign of Nicholas and his brother, who sought to expand their power outside of the Latin orbit into the Roman sphere. They, therefore, adopted and adapted their identity to fit this new desire and to transform the Orsini family from Latin and Catholic to Roman and Orthodox. For, as Vlada Stankovic argues, the key to strengthening familial ties with the Romans and to quiet acceptance as Roman was the adoption of Byzantine orthodoxy. Throughout this process, as I hope I have shown, the importance of the faith identity of the Orsini family was an essential and indispensable element within their wider identity. Furthermore, their shifting religious personas reflect the adaptability required to survive and thrive in the borderlands of Late Byzantium. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I would like to thank both our speakers for their thought-provoking papers. To me, at least, it seems that faith emerges as a strong political instrument in late Byzantium. Now let's hear any questions, thoughts, and reflections on Rustam Shukurov's and Jack Dooley's papers. First, for Professor Shukurov, let me begin. Do you think that this duality of religious identity, which you have very well described, was a matter of convenience or how did historical actors reconcile the differences in matters of faith? Did these differences in matters of faith not matter for people developing dual identities?
Thank you very much for your question. You know, it's a question for myself as well, on the one hand. On the other hand, you know, first of all, they were political animals. I mean, sultans, nobility, or many of them, you know. If we talk specifically about, I don't know, Byzantine clergy or Muslim Muslim intellectuals in Anatolia, at least. Of course, for them, the question of faith very much mattered. But common, just, I mean, not religious, political persons, for them, it was, first of all, it was a right. You know, it was a right, it was a custom, it was a habit. And on the one hand, so both, I mentioned only two persons, Kai Khosrau I and Kai Kavus II. We know that both of them had Greek mothers. You know, just according to the rules, to the habits of a Seljuk noble family, they lived with their mothers in harem, in the harem. You know, in this harem, not only their mothers were Greek, you know, their grandmothers and great-grandmothers were Greek. And just the entourage of these Greek ladies was partially or just mostly Greek. So Greek language and accompanying just Greek habits, customs, including Christian rites, you know, rituals. It was just very familiar for them. And they were not theologians, you know, just to have faith. It's very rare, to my mind, to a rare blessing, just given not to everybody. Just I mean, just to have faith, just as a part of your personality. These persons just, in a sense, just they didn't have faith. So, and if you are just being such a person in Constantinople, just you speak freely in Greek, you know, it's your native language. And you follow the way of life of the locals. And just please note, when Seljuks from Anatolia in the 12th century, in the 13th century, had problems, political problems, I mean nobility and the sultans, the Sultanic dynasty. If they had problems in their homeland, they fled to Constantinople, not to Baghdad, Damascus, or something, or Aleppo, or something, you know. In this sense, Constantinople was closer to them, culturally closer. You know, we have some similar examples from the Ilkhanid court, early Ilkhanid court, immediately just before Gazan, just the second half, the second quarter, just the last quarter of the 13th century. Just the Khan Baidu. He also he was both Muslim and Christian, and just introduced himself to Christians as a Christian and to Muslims as Muslim. So just it's the matter of it's not the matter of faith, it's the matter of culture, you know. You can be just, you can join in yourself Chinese, say, and just French culture. No problem, you know. We know a lot of people like this. So it was like this, you know. It was the matter of culture, not the matter of religion, not the matter of faith.
Okay. So harem Christianity, this idea you have written of in your work. This is something I will also build on this idea tomorrow in my own paper. And also to this, I will return to this distinction between political animals, as you say, and virtuosi of faith, and how they perceived faith in different ways. So any other question for our first speaker? Or any thoughts? Yes, Haralambe.
There were both fascinating papers. A lot of evidence that we are trying to absorb, a lot of perspectives. And what comes as a question to both our speakers is, in the end, through the familiarity with their historical sources, with the period, their feeling, through the close reading of these texts of art and of all kinds, archaeological evidence and so forth, but also of oral traditions. Is it religion? Is it language? Is it ethnic origin, education, political allegiance that matters more? Would you perhaps share your thoughts on this? Are some of these elements, or all of these elements, of equal importance, given also what you mentioned in your papers, the circumstances that might dictate also change of attitudes in all this? What are your thoughts?
So let me start. Just I was the first speaker, so just you know, I think actually all these aspects you mentioned, of course, matter. And again, we have to distinguish if we if we talk about the medieval culture, and not only medieval, you know, just the ability to just to believe is very important, you know. Just we have the example of Christian martyrs throughout the history, just of interrelations between Muslim and Christian worlds. So these were the persons who really had religion in their heart, and just they suffered, just they were ready to suffer. But if we talk about more, say, simple human creatures, you know, culture, just education, probably are more important for them for their choice between different cultures, between different options, different cultural paradigms. So it's my answer. Thank you.
I'm not sure what more I can add to that. I largely agree with, I think, well, I entirely agree with what Massimo said. I think it's, I think all identity traits are important to the individuals that hold them. Otherwise, they wouldn't be identity traits. That's, I think, the core nature of identity. But as I probably argued in my paper, these identity traits can be wielded in such a way that to achieve outcomes that you desire. So in my case, or at least what I attempted to argue, was the use of faith identities in order to achieve political power, where, yeah, I think, but that isn't what I'll add to my argument, is that's not to diminish the importance of faith identities to these individuals. You can both be highly religious and a spiritual individual as well as politically motivated.
Dear Jack, there is also a question for you in the chat, but I see Theo Marinos raising a hand. So,
Exactly.
yes.
Enormous.
Hi, everyone. Yeah, my thought was writing my long question down in the chat so everyone was able to read it and say, okay, I can prepare myself for Theo's thoughts. Okay, thank you both presenters for the excellent presentation. You're absolutely right if you focus on noblemen, on elite people, because first, we have much more sources about them. And second, it's easier to follow their life. But I'm interested in what I will call middle class and low class people, especially low class people who are social climbers, able upscaling socially themselves or their families. This is my question in the chat. Because one thing is clear, if you live in a Muslim society, in a Catholic society, or in an Orthodox society, at least back then, all of them had it's a man's world structure, which means normally the idea was the father is taking the decision for the faith/denomination of the child. And my question is, for example, if I was a simple soldier, mercenary, Western style, coming to Byzantium and staying there, marrying a Greek woman, knowing probably I will do my life here, I'll be able to get into his mind using a virtual time machine to say, okay, what was the decision? Same, I'm Catholic, so the children will be Catholic. My wife is fine with it. My parents-in-law too, because they know it's a men's world. He said, no. Living here, the best thing for my side, to become Orthodox. The same could be in Crete, for example. We had there this military service people who were small landowners. The Venetians called them sergeante, also sergeants. And there's the same. Everyone, every sergeant, every Greek Orthodox sergeant in Crete knew I can get up to this point, but not below. Above this, no one is possible. I have to change my faith. I have to become a Venetian Christian. My thoughts is, if both of you know, for example, church books, do we have church books, for example, where they say, in Crete, for example, Michele Cristoforo, which is really already very suspicious as a name for Italian or Venetian, Michele Cristoforo with a nickname Il Greco, or from the Greek side, Michalis, Frankinis, or Frangos. So, for example, that we say, oh, Nixheim shows us that the family used to have different roots from another region, and then they changed. Enough from my side. Please, your comments.
Who starts?
You can start if you would like.
Okay. Actually, thank you very much for the question, Theo. We have an example a very an excellent example from the Chrysoberges, from Patriarch Chrysoberges. So it was something like 1160s or 1170s. A group of Agarans, that is newcomers from Anatolia, from Muslim Anatolia, were summoned to the Constantinopolitan Synod, and they were just they were questioned about their faith. Just Agarans insisted that they are Christians, but the synod demanded just their baptism. Why? Just Agarans said our mothers were Greek in Anatolia, and our mothers just baptized us when we were home. So just this example shows that in the middle class newcomers from Anatolia, this syncretism, this duality was also it prevailed, not only among nobility. So just this group of Agarans, they were common people.
That's a very interesting question, and yes, I think I focused too much on like the nobility in my paper probably, but I've got a couple of interesting examples of sort of middle to like lower class. We don't actually know which individuals these cases really refer to, but you can imagine that they're below the elites of society. There's a letter from, I think, 1252 from a Dominican friar back to Western Europe complaining. So this is when Constantinople is still under Latin control. He complains that children who have Latin fathers and Greek mothers, they are openly being baptized in Latin churches, and then later on, secretly, the Greek mothers are taking the babies off to be rebaptized by Greek priests. So that shows that even within a marriage, there can be conflict about these about faith identities. But you can imagine the danger that the mother must have gone to do such a thing, and the importance that it must have held to them to do such a thing, especially if it's against the wishes of the husband. A second case, this is more to do with top-down identity. So sort of the government's interest in the identities of their subjects. In this case, we got the Venetian bailiff in Constantinople is complaining back to Venice that the Roman government, the Byzantine government, was forcibly converting, in air quotes, the Gasmuli, those of who are half Greek, half Latins, to become fully Greek, in a sense, to drop their Venetian citizenship, to drop perhaps their faith, and to take up Greek identity traits, especially legal identity traits. The reason for that is largely tax. The Venetians were exempt from taxes in in Constantinople, and that also applied to the Gazmuli as Venetian citizens, and where the Roman government was trying to find every last penny. I think they fell into that a easy target. And for the Venetians, they wanted as many Venetians in Constantinople just to strengthen their position, especially against the other Italian states. And I think you're right in excluding these two cases, that most people probably went the direction that of either least resistance, or they viewed the best prospects and being in terms of, in this case, of faith. And so for probably most people, it was a personal decision based on their particular context at their particular time. I hope that answers your question.
I think there is a question from Norman.
Yes.
If you would activate your microphone, please.
Yes, I've got
yes.
it. I've got
Yes.
it. As everyone has said, two fascinating presentations about the fluidity of identities, and I very much like harem Christianity. That's a new thought to me, which begins to make sense of Eleni Cantacuzini and her marriage to Orhan, and what happened there, and how it was so easily arranged with no ecclesiastical objection either. That's another dimension. But I just want to make one plea about with Dr. Duri's presentation. I heard too much about the Orthodox Church and the Catholic Church. I think this is anachronistic. There was a variety of views, of course, but basically, I mean, even one of the documents talks about the Greek schisms, the Greeksism. The Greeks were regarded as schismatics, and the Latins were regarded as schismatics from the other side. And in fact, the expression the Orthodox Church, as we use it today, is only post-Council of Florence. The failure of the Council of Florence changed everything. And it was then that you got, as far as I've been able to find out, the Orthodox Church, as we use the phrase today, was first used by John Evgenikos, the brother of Mark Evgenikos. And the Latins on their side became much more hardline afterwards. And I think of the conclave that didn't elect Bessarion Pope in, what was it, 1455, something like that. He was regarded as a neophyte by one of the French cardinals. So that there's a lot of fluidity about what Latin. I mean, both churches called themselves the Holy Catholic and Apostolic Church until then, both Latins and Greeks. There's a lot of fluidity in quite what Latin was and what Greek was. It seems to me, and yet there's a whole range of attitudes you find among all the players in this period. It's just these thoughts.
Yes, thank you very much. Yeah, no, you're completely right. I was probably being too rigid in my and that probably, and the fluidity probably helps with the flexible identities, the nature of the Orsini moving from one to the other, the fact that it isn't so fixed in stone as.
Of course, I speak as one myself who was moved from one to the other, and not just east and not just west to east, but more complicated within that. But I'll leave that out.
I think there is a question or a comment by Father David. I saw a hand raised.
Thank you. Thank you, Crucible. Yes, actually, my question and comment was actually well addressed by Jack earlier about identity from the top down. And one of the things that just to piggyback on what Norman said about the fluidity of identity, that baptism, for example, doesn't require faith or decision on behalf of the person being baptized, in the majority of cases, because baptism is done to you. It's not something necessarily that you choose for yourself. And so I would just contrast that to the kind of performative identity that we're hearing about in the excellent paper by Professor Rustam, which seems a lot more kind of pragmatic, perhaps, and cultural, as he says. But yeah, fascinating. Thank you so much. I really enjoyed both of the thought-provoking papers. Thank you.
Thank you.
We also have with us a number of colleagues working on other parts of the Mediterranean. Perhaps they wish to share their thoughts with us. Teresa Shokros on the Morea. I see Angeliki Limberopoulou and Marina Koumanoudi working on Crete. So if you have any thoughts on conversions and religious identities and dual identities and how family matters in shaping these identities. Teresa?
If I may ask a question before anybody else would like to raise other queries or express some views, what happens with atheists? Is athos in the texts the ungodly, or what we perceive today as the person who does not believe the existence of a higher power? How they are treated by the church or in the communities?
I think
If there are any examples.
I think from a Byzantine perspective, these people might have been perceived as Hellenes. Yeah. This was a accusation, Hellenismo.
In the sense of adhering to philosophy rather than a religion, or to the pagan past, the pagan religion.
Pagan ideas, pagan values.
Or sorry for interrupting. Or also idolaters.
Yes, Evangel.
But sorry but these are not atheists then, are they? We're talking about people, if Hellenes or pagans is people who do not believe in the Christian God, or they're not atheists. And I wonder, actually, even if people who didn't believe would have been so bold in those days as to say that I do not believe in anything, in these circumstances. But anyway, Sovalandi, for Crete, if you still want my opinion, I wanted to say that in rural Crete, at least, which is my specialism, it is clear that in rural Crete in the 13th and 14th century, indeed we had some coming together between the Orthodox and the Catholic, although I do take the point about the fluidity of these terms. We have evidence that the Roman Catholics, the Venetians, due to the shortage of Latin priests in the rural areas actually did attend Orthodox services, something which is indirectly verified by the fact that Venice issued twice in 2 different times decrees against this practice. So, there's no smoke without fire. And at the same time, inscriptions again from rural Crete clearly state that certain churches were done by money of the Orthodox Christians, Orthodoxon Christianon, which again demonstrates or suggests that there was a clear division, and some communities did not accept the other part. So this is sorry, I don't want to go because but yeah, that's what I can say very quickly from Crete. Obviously, I cannot, 450 years in 3 sentences, obviously not, but just, that's my 2 pennies.
Thank you, Angeliki. And this shows us that we have to take into consideration all the different micro cases, micro regions, micro identities operating in this vast area, and avoid generalizations.
Yeah. Absolutely.
But returning to Haralambos' question, combined with Angelikis' answer, correct me if I am wrong, but I haven't seen anywhere in the sources in this period atheism existing as a kind of special category in religious matters.
Sorry, yes, again, I'm going to stop talking, I promise. Just wanted to say that even in hell, there are no, in hell, where the representations of sinner being punished in hell because we have no, well, until this moment, I have not seen any examples of people being branded as atheists and therefore burning in hell. We have very many sins, but atheism, at least as from the examples I know from Crete, is not one of them. And now I really will stop talking. I'm so sorry.
and also many priests in hell, Angeliki. Priests and monks.
Of both, I lied. I'm still talking. Sorry. Clearly, I lied. Yes, of both persuasions, Catholics and Orthodox. Both. And by Orthodox, I mean Arians. I mean, again, Orthodox who were considered heretics within Orthodoxy, if you see what I mean. Arians and Nestorians, the kind of, yeah.
Thank you.
Could I just say something about Milos, the island of Milos, which is the opposite that happened in Crete, where we have an early source, a 13th century source, which states that because of the lack of Catholic priests, Latin priests, to be more exact, the Latin settlers were baptized or went to church, to Orthodox churches, and this was stigmatized, and that was considered to be a problem, the lack of Latin priests in the island, because there was a fear that these settlers would eventually be absorbed by the local population. So it was a problem then, at least.
Thank you, Marina. Father David on the chat asks whether Mikhail Psellos was ever accused of atheism, and if you know something more, please add. But I think that he was accused of Hellenism, not officially accused. He was never tried.
I think to be an atheist, it was unimaginable, for the medieval mentality. So, an apistos, for example, it's a person who doesn't know the true God, the true God.
Yes.
Yes.
The same with Plethon.
Yeah, absolutely.
Dr. Russell, do you have anything to add from your wisdom on the subject?
It's just this atheism coming up. I think Professor Shukurov is right. But in the sources I've been reading about the martyrs, the neo-martyrs, there's a lot of the Iathe Muslimani. It was Atheos was somebody who didn't share your God, your view of God. So that was Atheos. I think it's I think people like Yemisos Plethon and Michael Psellos were accused of Hellenism, which was something quite different.
Well, sorry for interrupting. Just to let you know that Turkeys also accuse Christians of atheists. They used to call us infidels. Oh, yeah.
What happens also with the Uniates? Unite after the Florence
what happened to
adventure in terms of their identity being following the Greek rite according to the decree of the permission to use the Orthodox rite according to the decree, but abiding by the giving allegiance to the Pope.
Uniatism after the failure of the Council of Florence declined. I mean, you've got Isidore of Kiev, that the recent work by Philippidis and Hanak has really brought Isidore of Kiev brought him to life, and I like him very much as a personality, and he was an intensely Greek patriot. There he was commanding a section of the walls in 1453. He saw the sack with his own eyes. He got away on a ship, on a Latin ship. He got away to Crete. He was in such a state of melancholy and depression for 3 months. He was ill. He couldn't write to Bessarion or to the Pope to say what had happened. He did not regard Uniatism as something that was not Greek or not Orthodox, not at all. But that kind of Uniatism seems to me to fade away rather until the Council of Brest-Litovsk brings in a Slavic identity. I've just come back from Romania, where I was very interested talking about Staniloae there, and it's very interesting to see how Staniloae comes out of Transylvania, and this is where modern Uniatism really takes shape in Transylvania, because it was a frontier situation there between the Protestants and Catholics had an identity again, it's identity. They had an identity in Transylvania because it was Habsburg until 1920 when it passed to Romania, and the Orthodox had no identity. They got an identity by becoming Uniate. And very, to my mind, fascinatingly, they contributed, because they had to think about who they were, what their identity was, they made an enormous contribution to the sense of Romanian Orthodox identity in the between the wars periods. So Uniatism is not it's not just us and them.
There is a beautiful text that we have been studying with Jack and Chrysovalandis about this is and you must have knowledge, some of us. This is the letter written by Manuel II to his friend Alexius Iagoub, a converted Muslim, as Rustam mentioned also and explored in his book. And this is addressed to a friend of his, but actually it concerns another mutual friend who must be Emmanuel Kalekas, who by then have left the Greek church to join the Dominican convent in Pera. And he says, tell your friend, that is Emmanuel Kalekas, that he will never be able to be above suspicion, either to his own people, that is the Greeks, and those that he's deserting, because everything will betray his ancestral, his origin. And he mentions, as Rustam has mentioned before, the cultural traits, the way that he sits, the way that he eats, the way that he talks, the way that he rests on his couch, he says, are all reminiscent of his own origin. So the interesting here question is whether we have such instances in our historical texts or other sources of people that are in the middle. They have, for example, in this case, the Roman Greek Orthodox tradition behind them. They opt for the new, in this case, the Latin faith, but they do not feel that they are deserting their country, as he is accused directly by by the emperor. But they feel that their people are wrong in terms of doctrine, and hence the Latins are correct, and we should follow, like also Gidonis. So this is the question from your readings, and perhaps Norman, who has read so much all these years, and Rustam and our young scholar, and anybody else, Jack, if we have such instances of confession of the inner state of such a person.
Yes. If I may just add something more, don't forget that John V Palaiologos made a private submission to the papacy. It was a Latin Catholic in one sense. He didn't cease to be the epistimonarchis and the defensor of the Orthodox Church during this period. He just didn't pronounce on theological matters, but everything else he acted as the regulator of the church. And even Manuel Kalekas, to join the Latins, wasn't such a cultural leap as it might be today, because I mean, the Cristobergis brothers were Dominicans, and one of them got the right to celebrate the Dominican rite in Greek from the Pope. And I don't think actually the liturgy didn't sound so different between the two at that time, so far as I'm aware. Again, we mustn't import into the past our modern, rather strict deep compartments about these things.
If I can make a small comment, it just of a slightly earlier period, but it just reminds me of the Bekos arguments with George of Cyprus, where Bekos, as previous patriarch, is the unionist against the fervently anti-unionist Gregory of Cyprus, and they both, I don't think either of them viewed themselves as being Latins, or at least Bekos didn't. I don't think Gregory accuses Bekos of being Latin either. I think he accuses him of being wrong intellectually, almost, if I can remember what I've read of that debate.
Yes, Beckus wasn't accused of being a Latinophile, but of just of theological error. Yeah.
I have a very short comment in this regard. Just the case of Orthodox people who came to Constantinople, who came to Byzantium from other cultural areas. For example, Georgians who found themselves just in Constantinople or in the Athens. Say just people immigrating from Jerusalem in the 8th, 9th century, Orthodox people going to Constantinople. Or another example, Persians, Christian Persians, who fled from the Muslim power in the 7th century. Probably all of them, so their cultural identity was very different. But all of them were quite happy, to be among their co-religionists in Constantinople or just elsewhere in Byzantium. So
I think, Vallandimu, that you need to watch your watch.
Yeah.
We have a last question from Panayotis Andonopoulos.
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. I wanted just to add, after congratulations to all for this wonderful organization and wonderful papers presented, my feeling, and I have not studied the theological aspect at all, is that unlike the official papacy, the Dominicans took a much more positive view towards orthodoxy and thus facilitated a large number of Byzantine literati to approach them, if not to join them. So it's rather interesting that while the Dominicans are very, very tough towards the Albigenses, they consider, it seems, orthodoxy as a possible unions sort of bridge from the Latin perspective rather than vice versa, which occurs with the Orthodox towards the Latin Turks. But I was wondering if somebody could confirm this or perhaps reject it to me. But I've got this feeling that Dominicans tried to bridge to a large extent this gap between pure Orthodox and pure Catholics. Thanks a lot.
I think that's absolutely right. I think that's right. And if you look at the whole perspective, things change as late as post-Council of Trent. After the Council of Trent, the Catholic Church becomes confessionalized, and it stimulates a similar a counterpart confessionalization in Orthodoxy, and this is where we get difficulties that bring about ecclesiastical identities that we know today. But yes, the Dominicans. I mean, if you look at the correspondence between Bessarion and one of the Chrysobergis brothers, they are talking the same language. But when Bessarion was on his way to the Council of Ferrara, Florence, that is, they're not communicating to each other as aliens from the other side. And we mustn't forget that the really divisive thing was Palamite theology. Anti-Palamites, whether they were Orthodox or Latins, whether they were Greeks or Latins, could find common ground against what they saw as the innovation of Palamite theology.
which was forbidden to be discussed, if I'm correct, Norman, by the Emperor John the Eighth during Florence.
It was forbidden because, and the Pope, Pope Eugenius also wanted to know about it, but both the Emperor and the Pope knew that if they went down that road, it was all finished.
I think the Dominicans pressed the Pope for a condemnation of Palamas's theology, but the Pope did not agree.
Yes, that's correct. That's correct. The Pope wanted to keep that out of it. Yeah.
They had enough problems with everything else.
Absolutely. They had enough problems. Yeah.
So thank you everyone.